Greenpeace this morning. Melita, thank you for joining us.
Morning.
If I can just take my seat. Let me start at the beginning. It seems as if discussions on climate change have been deprioritized somewhat globally, and I get a sense here in South Africa. Would that be an accurate assessment?
I think the really big challenge with climate change is that it requires long-term thinking. So this is not something that is a short-term issue. It really requires long-term thinking. And as much as it's still on the agenda internationally and theoretically still on the agenda in South Africa, it's becoming more and more difficult to find the real action happening on climate change. South Africa, for example, plays a very progressive role in the negotiations. They actually play a bridge building role. But nationally, South Africa is investing in a coal boom. There's major coal expansion happening. But what is interesting is you're starting to see Barack Obama in the USA actually articulate things about climate change. You're starting to see international finance institutions stop talking about stop investing in coal-fired power stations. So there are movements that are happening. I think the problem is that it's at a really slow pace. What we really need to see is people standing up and saying they want cleaner, renewable energy investments. And we need governments to understand that we're actually in a burning room. We shouldn't argue about whether there's a fire or not. We should start by trying to rescue people.
You talk about the time frames being a little longer that on the discussion. Do we have time? Do we have the 30, 40 or 50 years to deal with this?
I think that So I think that's also one of the problems with climate change is people feel disempowered. It's so big, it's potentially so catastrophic. What can we even do to influence it? The reality is that we can still pull back from the brink of crisis, but it requires immediate action. And I think one of the even more worrying things is that the space for activism is closing up internationally. Yeah. Even in, for example, Greenpeace has 30 activists who were just arrested in Russia for protesting in the Arctic against oil drilling. They're actually facing charges of piracy, which could see them in jail for 15 years. And this is for a peaceful protest.
And we know that they take no prisoners in Russia, unfortunately. I wanted to talk about next week, which will be another landmark week in the discussions with COP19 going to Warsaw, Poland. Are you happy as a movement with what's been happening at the COP movement? We've had 17 years in South Africa, and the way that the COP movement has dealt with the issues.
I think the COPs are pretty challenging. South Africa hosted COP17, and that was a very challenging time. But South Africa did play a role in terms of moving things forward. I think the host country really plays a role. So this year it's Poland, and Poland is heavily invested in coal. And so their vested interests mean that there's potentially not much space to move forward. So as a movement, and I can talk on behalf of Greenpeace, but generally the environmental movement, we're very frustrated because governments say that climate change is important. South Africa says that climate change is important, but we're building two of the biggest coal-fired power stations in the world.
You talk about South Africa. I wanted to ask you, what do you in South Africa's Greenpeace see as the main climate changes we'll be battling, and then what sort of catastrophes do you foresee in South Africa and Southern Africa in the next 50 years?
So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their 5th assessment report earlier this year, and that started going into what the potential impacts of climate change are. What they found is that there's a 95% certainty that humans are causing climate change. So scientists are almost as certain as they can be. In terms of trying to predict what different countries are going to face, it's really difficult. But South Africa, as an already water-scarce country, is going to be facing increasing water scarcity, but then also other things like increasing floods and droughts. But it's also likely to impact on our agricultural patterns because, of course, we need water for agriculture, and temperatures changing could also impact on malaria zones. So we're likely to see a whole range of impacts which could be potentially devastating, particularly when you're going to agriculture and food security issues.
water scarcity is a problem, and I want you to stay with us because I'm just going to cross to Cape Town, where members of the World Wildlife Fund are on a unique journey to show how water makes its journey to the tap. They're walking from one of Cape Town's water source areas in the Boerland Mountains, the headwaters of the Berg and Easter rivers, right into the city bowl. Various experts are walking alongside the participants, sharing their knowledge and their experiences along the way. The full walk is about 4 days and more than 100 kilometers across provoking terrain in the mountains. And today is the final stretch, and we're going to speak to the World Wildlife Fund's Christine Colvin, who's on the journey. Good morning, Christine. Can you hear us? Christine, we're trying. She's actually walking in the mountains right now. Today's the final day, and we're trying to connect with her on mobile phone technology. So, Christine, good morning. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so happy that we could connect with you. Just tell us about this journey that you guys are on. Now, I know you're reaching the end and you'll be finishing in Cape Town City Bowl today, but you guys must be exhausted. What has it been like the last couple of days?
Yeah, it really has been an adventure. We've been doing a 4-day walk, which starts up in one of our water source areas near Franschhoek in the mountains behind the Berg River Dam. And we're on the journey of water. So we're showing the journey that water takes before we get it in the cities. And the message is really that your water doesn't come from a tap. Water comes from nature, and if we look after nature, nature will look after our water.
Now, the outlook for South Africa going forward does not look very good. We're a water-scarce country as it is already. Just tell us about the connections you've made with the communities that you've gone through and the impact that water scarcity might have on these poorer communities.
Yeah, well, yesterday we were walking through Khayelitsha, and we could see a lot of the huge challenges in terms of managing water in those environments and getting water to people in those environments. And today we're walking through Athlone, and we had a great session first thing this morning with some of the school children at Dagbreek Primary School. You know, when we said to them, where does your water come from? And they all say from a tap. And we say, no, it doesn't come from a tap. And they were very surprised. So, you know, we've been interacting with these kids, and you're right, South Africa's a water-scarce country. We're already using all the water that we have available to use. So if we want to have more water available in the future, we've got to use what we have much more wisely. We've got to prevent leaks from all of our urban infrastructure, and we've got to look after the water source areas that our water comes from, because that's where water starts its journey to us. And so if those water source areas are suffering, then we're not going to get water downstream.
Christine, we're looking at some of the pictures that you guys have put up about your walk and how it's gone the last couple of days. Tell us about the reception by the communities that you've walked through, and then also maybe some of the projects that will come out of this.
We've had a great reception. You know, all the people that we've encountered, we've met in Stellenbosch, schoolboys from Poorest who every week go out and clean the river at their school. They look after their section of river, knowing that it doesn't really benefit them, but it benefits people downstream. And we've heard from people who are working with the communities in Khayelitsha, in those areas where people have to share water at communal taps. Hygiene is extra important. So just the basics of hand washing and minimizing the transmission of waterborne diseases is really critical. And the City of Cape Town have been really fantastic in pushing these education schemes out into the community to explain the basics of hand washing, how to use communal taps so that germs are not being spread between families who have to share water.
Christine, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I know that you guys are walking at the moment, and you'll be finishing your project a little bit later today. Thank you once again. That's Christine Colvin of the World Wildlife Fund. They're on a unique journey to show South Africans how water makes its journey to your tap at home. I've still got Melita Steele of Greenpeace with me in studio this morning. A very interesting bit. I wanted to ask you, do you think that South Africans, we're going to have to get used to having less water and there might be a future where water scarcity is a reality and restrictions is a real reality for ordinary South Africans?
I think it's a huge issue, and not only is South Africa water scarce, but Southern Africa is water scarce, which of course has implications in terms of our security as a country.
Yeah.
We're also looking at people actually having to move because of climate change, so lack of access to water, crossing national boundaries, that kind of thing is happening. I think in South Africa it becomes about making smart choices. There are massive investments that need to be made in new water infrastructure, but one of the major issues as well is that we actually use a lot of water because of our coal dependency. So not only are we facing greater water scarcity because of climate change, but the coal-fired power stations that are driving climate change actually use huge amounts of water. So
Yeah.
Eskom uses 10,000 litres of water per second.
Wow.
Because 90% of our electricity comes from coal. And essentially, if we're making smarter choices, it would be that we start moving to renewable energy. A lot of those technologies are water-free. And that means that we can actually have a future where we do have enough water for everyone.
Well, Melita, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm sure we could carry on, and all the best for you guys. Greenpeace at COP19 next week. I'm sure you have a full program that you guys will be attending to, and we'll keep an eye on how things proceed there. That is Melita Steele of Greenpeace joining us in studio this morning. But our top story